The advice and opinions expressed by the host of Autism Live and her guests are meant solely as suggestion and should not be in any way construed as child-specific advice. The Center for Autism and Related Disorders advises working with a board-certified behavior analyst who has experience with autism before starting any intensive behavioral intervention. Any choices you make in determining your child's treatment are completely at your own discretion.
And here we are with Doreen Granpeesheh. Hi, Doreen. How are you?
I'm good, thanks, Nancy.
It's good to be with you this morning.
Thank you. Very good to be here again.
Okay. And we want to remind people that this is not, they need to talk with their own clinicians.
Sure, absolutely. Welcome, everybody. It's nice to be back. And this is our usual disclaimer, I guess, at the beginning of the show where, I'm very happy to answer questions today. And we have received a whole bunch of questions, as I see in front of Nancy. But the main thing for everyone to know is that I'm going to try my best to answer your questions, but there's no real way that we can give you child-specific advice because obviously I would need a lot more time with each individual and I would need to get to know the children or the people that you're writing about, and that's impossible in this sort of show. So please, when you listen to my advice, make sure that you also, if you have professionals involved, it would be, I will always recommend that you access the people around you first and try to get professionals who can actually see your child and give you face-to-face individualized advice. Otherwise, a lot of my advice is really just to guide you and to give you direction, and hopefully that will help.
Okay, we're going to start with two questions from DJ Phillips at Unlocking the Key to Autism.
Sure, hi DJ.
Okay, yeah, hi DJ. His first question is, what do you think about fidget spinners with autistic children, which is big these days?
Right, good job DJ for thinking about that. I was thinking about that myself the other day when I saw these. In fact, we actually have, it's not just fidget spinners, but it's anything that can actually sort of is what we would in the old days classify as a self-stimulatory type of toy, I guess. And these are toys that allow the child to self-stimulate. And so if a child with autism likes to look at like fidget spinners, they'll be doing this continuously. And when you're doing this all the time, I guess you're not really focused on anything outside of doing that. And to some extent, as it's funny, Nancy, because you see our own kids these days and they're on their phones, right? And they're like constantly doing this sort of stuff, and they're not 100% focused on you because sometimes you have to call them a couple of times, to get their attention. But ultimately, most of our kids they're not completely blocking out the environment. They learn to multitask. And what happens with children on the spectrum is that they don't learn to multitask, but when they're engaged with something self-stimulatory like this, they're completely blocking out the whole environment. And that is something we've always kind of not really promoted because it reduces your ability to learn. So if you're doing this continuously, you're not really learning by observing or looking at other people and so on. So that's the bad side of it. On the positive side, sometimes we all need to, I guess, get away from whatever it is in our environment for one reason or another. Sometimes people are like very, let's say, agitated, or some of our kids might be anxious or worried or hyper-stimulated. Let's say something is causing massive stimulation for them. Then, it's not such a bad idea to go to something like a fidget spinner because it'll take you out of whatever is causing you anxiety, whatever is causing you rage, perhaps, or whatever, and it'll calm you down. It'll bring you back to your center in some ways. So that's sort of the positive side of it. So, like anything else, I think that if you have, personally, I feel that if it is used in limitation, so if a fidget spinner is used for two purposes, one purpose being kind of to take a break, to calm yourself, let's say, to get away from something in your environment that's disturbing you at short intervals, that's okay. And then also it's okay to me if it's used for the purposes of reinforcement. Like a lot of kids just love these, so you can easily give that, let the child do it a couple times and take it away. And that is a reinforcing type of thing. It's like giving a small game. And so it's perfectly fine as long as it doesn't become obsessive in nature.
Yes, because couldn't this become its own stem that
Exactly,
the child starts to really crave it? And
Exactly. And like
wanna
anything
stop.
else that is self-stimulatory, like the toys, let's say, that have music or sound or whatever, and if a child is sitting there doing it all day long, that's no good.
Right.
As long as you control it and limit it and make sure that it's at short intervals, then I think it's fine.
Okay. DJ's second question is, how do you get a 3-year-old severely autistic child to take medication when all he will drink is milk? His mother has even tried using rewards to try to get him to take the medication. He won't take it.
So that's a great question, DJ. There's a whole program, and I don't know the medication that we're talking about, if it's in pill form or what. I assume it is. But we do a whole program for pill swallowing. And it's a shaping process where it starts with what are these things called that you use on cakes? They're like speckles.
The sprinkles.
Sprinkles,
Yeah.
right? So like it starts with actually putting one sprinkle on the child's tongue, and then having them drink a little bit of milk, and then that will that you gradually, very gradually. So you have a container like this, and then the first one is sprinkles, and then the last one is the capsule or pill, and everything in between is gradients of larger and larger. So we have a lot of different things, and you actually get to it. And the reason we do it is because we have placebo pills of different sizes and placebo tablets of different sizes that are filled with just a product that is neutral and doesn't hurt harm the child. But you start with these, and you very gradually teach the child to swallow. And sometimes, at some phase you get stuck for a little bit because it's now the size where the child can actually feel it. But after a while, and the process we've timed it, it's about 70 hours or 60 hours, 60, 70 hours. Some kids go really fast.
Right.
Others take a little bit longer. But it is important at one point or another for children to learn how to swallow pills because, my God, some of our kids are on 75 supplements a day. So
Right.
I remember we developed this program years ago when a parent wrote to me and said it literally takes us an hour and a half every morning just to give her supplements. And I was like, that's ridiculous. We don't teach, because the parent was like mashing everything or
Right.
putting it in for whatever. And I was like, no, we can teach swallowing.
Right.
So that's really the thing to do. And otherwise, I mean, I hope that answers the question, because that should do it. But my concern is more a child who doesn't drink anything but milk.
Yes.
And I don't know what kind of milk it is. Hopefully it's not cow milk,
Right.
because most of our kids react negatively to cow milk, but they do pretty well with other types of milk.
Yeah.
So that would be fine. And coconut milk, for instance, would be fantastic for the child.
Right. Interesting. I thought that Wyatt would not be able to take pills, and I just assumed he wasn't able to take pills.
And then he just did it.
Brought him in here and to work with Dr. Art,
And we did
and he gave him the first size pill.
This
and
exact
he just
program.
took it right
you saw-
away.
Yeah, pill
Right.
swallow program.
So I had assumed he wouldn't take them, and when in fact he took them quite readily.
Right
and-
away.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
So you never
interesting.
know. Sometimes
You
with our
don't
kids,
know. Sometimes they might change. So.
Absolutely.
Okay, we have a question here. My son is 7. He is potty trained for urination, but not for bowel movements.
Okay.
He is nonverbal, and we trained him for urination by having him sit on the toilet until he urinated and gave him toys that were saved just for urinating. Training for bowel movements has been so difficult because I can't predict when he's going to go. He goes once a day and the time varies. I can't give him his toy for going because I don't want to push when he doesn't need to go. I would appreciate any advice. Thank you. I love your show.
Well, thank you. That's very nice. Bowel movements are a little bit harder, but and very hard if you don't know when it's going to happen. start by doing this. Start by tracking when it happens every day in a diary, because even though it might happen at different times, but there might also be something that does actually correspond. Like, for instance, it always happens 1 hour after eating or something like that. Try to write it down. And, worst case scenario is that if it happens on some days at 9 a.m. and other days at 6 p.m., that's a huge variation of time. If that does happen, then the second thing you can do is try to see if there's any particular environmental cues. Like, some of our kids become very private when they're about to have a bowel movement. Like, they'll go to another room. A lot of kids will go and hide in a closet. Sometimes with a child, you can actually see it in their facial or body because they tense up because they're trying to control it. See if you find any kind of antecedent that gives you a sign, because that obviously helps. If you don't have a time frame and you don't have an antecedent, then you're just going to have to basically do the same thing you did with urination, which is have him on the toilet all day with breaks of getting up, obviously. See, when we do urination training, and I don't know what process you did, when we do toilet training, we use this process that was developed by Fox and Azrin. And basically the process is a 2-day period where the child spends the vast majority of their time on the toilet, but with a lot of breaks. Mm-hmm. So like, you start out on the toilet, the whole bathroom is decorated, everything is there, TV, whatever. So you're pretty much living in the bathroom those 2 days, but the child gets progressively longer and longer breaks when they get off the bathroom, if they've had a success. If they haven't, then the break period is very short and the child runs around with no underwear on. That's one of the things we published on this, actually, that children tend to have accidents when you put a diaper or underwear on. When there isn't anything on, they're more likely to hold it until they get back to the toilet, which is kind of interesting. So I would recommend that you do the same procedure, and please look up Fox and Azrin toilet procedure. But what you're doing is making sure in between you are not putting a diaper or pull-ups or underwear, anything on. And you're obviously keeping an eye on the child, and you're keeping the child very close to the toilet, mm-hmm. so that as soon as it starts to happen, you pop the child on the toilet and then heavily reinforce as you did. You did the right thing, by the way, in terms of saving some reinforcers just for the process of toilet training. So that's a very, very good thing, and that's what you'll have to do again. In the old days when we didn't know, this is before we knew how much gastrointestinal issues are involved with kids. Like, we're talking in the 70s and 80s. What we used to do is we literally used to give the child stool softeners, so that or laxatives even, mm-hmm. so that they would have a day where they are going very frequently. Right. So many of our kids had constipation issues in the 80s. But, now we know better. Now we know that a lot of our children have issues with their gastrointestinal mm-hmm. processing, so we don't do that obviously mm-hmm. anymore, although half of our kids are still on some form of laxative. Right. So, which makes it very difficult.
Okay. All right, we're going to take a brief break, and we'll be back with more questions.
Great.
So stay with us.
Thank you.
Hi guys, welcome back. For the month of July, I figured we're going to do something again that's more for outdoorsiness, since it's summertime and I know your kids are going to be home and you need some activities to do inside and outside. So for July, I figured we'd make a lantern. So let's get started. The materials you'll be needing are wax paper, an iron, crayons, scissors, popsicle sticks, pencil sharpener, a glue gun, and tape. What I did first is that I have my iron heating on medium heat, okay? Make sure you keep this far away from your child because I won't want them to get hurt. Next thing I want to do is I'm going to take my wax paper and I'm going to make 4 sheets. I'm going to cut out a thing that's about 12 inches long, okay? Now that I have my wax papers cut out, what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab my crayons, and if you have kids around, which I hope you do, I'm going to grab them and have them make some crayon shavings. What the shavings are going to end up doing is making it a design. And again, this is another time for you and your child to talk about colors. You can discuss like what would happen if you mix, some blue crayons and some yellow crayons. What would that produce? When you and your child have finally decided there's enough crayon shavings on your wax paper, what you're going to do next is you're going to take it and fold it in half. Now that I have it folded in half, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take an old newspaper and then I'm going to sandwich it in between. And then with my iron on medium heat, I'm just going to have it gently on there just so the wax melts into the paper and becomes one thing. Let's take a peek inside. And as you can see, all the crayons have melted into it, making this beautiful kind of like rainbow-ish color. All right, now I'm going to do this with the other 3 that I've made, and then we're going to assemble our beautiful lantern. All right? So here are my 4 finished panels that I'm ready to build into the lantern. So what I'm going to do is I have these popsicle sticks, and I'm going to build them into a square and glue them together with my hot glue gun. While you're building your lantern, it's a good opportunity to work on math skills with your child. You could discuss how many sides does a square have versus how many sides does a cube have. Okay, I'm going to do this another 3 more times, so I have one for every single side. All right, well, now that I have these 4 different sides built, I am now going to take these wax paper things that I built, and then I'm going to put glue on here and smash it on there, okay? I know the wax paper is way too big for it, but what we're going to do later is trim it. All right, so now they're all done being glued together. Now I'm going to take my scissors and trim along the outside. Now that the 4 sides are done, I'm going to take some tape and I'm going to line the edge of it so they will stay together to make my cube form. And voila, here's my lantern, but it's missing something. You're right, it's missing a light to illuminate it. So what I'm going to put in here is an LED light. I'm definitely not going to put a real candle or else this thing's going to catch on fire, and that is a real safety hazard, okay? So here's my little guy, and I'm going to turn it on and let's see what happens. Ooh, look at that. Isn't that pretty nice? And it's not even dark yet. I would love if you shared your pictures of your finished crafts. But until then, craft on. Bye, guys.
Can you see me flying by your side?
And we are back with Ask Dr. Doreen, where you get to ask your questions of Dr. Doreen Granpeesheh. Doreen, we had something that's come in from a parent. What can I do to stop my 2-year-old on the spectrum from hitting? He does it when he's upset.
Yeah.
Thanks. It's a big problem with a lot of families.
Very much so, and it's always. I'll repeat this entire lecture on how to identify functional behavior because I think it's so important. So when we get upset, you have to ask yourself why the child is getting upset, and there's a whole bunch of different reasons, and it's incredibly important to identify the reason. Because without really identifying the reason, what you do could be wrong. So let's say there are basically a set number of functions being reasons. So for instance, I might get upset, and also let's define what getting upset is actually. So let's assume this child is she naming any particular behavior?
Just hitting when he gets
Hitting.
upset.
Okay, so he hits. So let's say he hits
Right.
and he's upset because he wants an object that he can't have, or he wants something that he can't have. So that's called a tangible function.
Mm-hmm.
That means there's a tangible item out there that he wants to gain access to, and he can't have it.
Mm-hmm.
So he's throwing a fit and hitting you. Okay, so that's one function. If that is the case, when it's a tangible function, you have to make sure that the child doesn't get that item when they hit, but they do get the item when they ask appropriately.
Mm-hmm.
That's the way to deal with it. So basically what you're doing is you're teaching the child that hitting is not an effective way of communicating. Now let's say the function of the hitting is escape.
Right.
That means the child is hitting because they want to get out of something. So like the environment they're in, for instance. So you will go and say, we're in a classroom. That's a great example, because a lot of times in classrooms, kids will throw a tantrum and hit the teacher because they know that the teacher is going to take them out, right? And that's actually what they wanted. They want to get out. So when it's an escape function, you make sure the child doesn't escape when they hit, but does get to escape when they ask. So the child could ask for a break, and then they get to go out. Otherwise, they have to stay there.
Okay.
So that's the other thing. Another one is demand function. So I will place a demand on you, and you're trying to avoid the demand, and you want to get out of that demand. So, and so what you do is you make sure that when you place a demand on the child, you model them through so they actually do this instead of trying to escape it. You guys, when you identify the function, it becomes very clear how to deal with the behavior. But saying he gets upset, you can't do anything about it because you don't know what he's trying to communicate. Always remember that hitting or any of the behaviors, challenging behaviors, are communication. They're like language. Think of them as language. When you see your child doing something, think of it as, if he could talk, what would he be saying? If he could talk, what would he be saying? Always go to that immediately. He's hitting, he's screaming, whatever it is. If he could talk, what would he be saying? And if he's saying, I want out of here, he could be saying, I don't want to do this. He could be saying, I want that food, that item, that whatever. He could be saying, I'm too tired, whatever it is. Like, whatever it is, make sure that he doesn't get that because he hit. Teach him a better way to ask for that thing that he wants. So if he's tired, teach him to ask for breaks.
Right.
If he wants an object, teach him how to ask for objects or point to objects. If he, wants out, teach him how to ask for time out or to go out or whatever it is. It doesn't even have to be verbal, but it has to be appropriate. And that's where it comes to when we say you teach an appropriate way for the child to communicate so that they don't turn to this inappropriate way of communicating. Mm-hmm. That's really all it is. All of our children's challenging behaviors are ways to communicate. Mm-hmm. And if they had a better way to communicate, they would use it. Now, it's interesting because when you look at a mom taught me this many years ago. But when you look at what happens when we have a baby, right? When you have a baby, the baby doesn't know how to communicate. So what do? They cry, they scream, etc. And we as parents figure out what that cry means. There's one cry that's hunger, one cry that it's I'm wet, one cry. But notice what they are. Like hunger is I want food. It's a tangible function, right? Being wet is an escape function. Get me out of these diapers. Let me escape from these wet diapers. You know what I mean? Right. So it's all the same behavior, but it's just crying. And we identify, oh, this is one type of, that's a pain cry. That's a wet cry. That's a hungry cry. And then as the child ages, like let's say the child becomes 1, we as parents no longer accept that. What do we say? Use your words. Right? We tell our kids, use your words. Is that what you want? Do you want juice? Do you want this? And we teach our typically developing kids how to use their words instead of crying. What happens when at 2 or 1.5 or 2 or 3 year child is diagnosed? We as parents get scared and we're like, oh, I can't put the same contingencies because he has autism. So I'm going to try to figure out, because he doesn't have language, I'm going to try to figure it out. So what ends up happening is you treat the child the same way you did when he was a baby instead of asking the child to use his words. So over time, the only thing the child learns is the only way I can communicate with these people is if I cry, if I hit, the child is not to blame because that's the only thing he's learned. Mm-hmm. And once the child learns some other acceptable form of communication, then that replaces it. Okay. But it will only replace it if the inappropriate, the challenging behavior didn't get him what he wanted, and the appropriate one did, and if the appropriate form of communication was easier. It has to be easier than hitting you. It has to be faster. Like throwing a tantrum is pretty exhausting for a child, And if you can give the child an easier way to request something, they'll always turn to that.
Okay. So it could be a combination of reasons why this child is hitting.
Thank you for saying that. That's a very important fact too, because you have a child who has always multiple functions. Very good point. So it's not always simple. It's not always like, oh, I hit because I wanted that object. Sometimes it's, I hit because I wanted that object, but I also enjoy the attention I get when you come and try to take care of me.
Okay.
Attention is another function. And so, yes, often it's multiple functions, and it's very hard to get rid of behaviors that have multiple functions, because you really do need to kind of prevent both functions. So like in that case, you would want to make sure the child doesn't get the object and doesn't get attention. So that's a very important fact. And so, you know, to figure out what the function of the behavior is for your child, either it's really obvious, like you are looking at the child and you take something away and the child tantrums, or it's not obvious, in which case I recommend that you try to get a behavior analyst in there to do a functional assessment. Functional assessments are very important. And once you have the functional assessment, then the treatment plan is very obvious, because there's only so many treatments that go with each function. By the way, if you go on Skills, which is our database, and it is www.skillsforautism.com. On Skills, there's a section that says BIP Builder and CIFA, C-I-F-A, and CIFA stands for Cards Indirect Functional Assessment.
Okay.
So it's a bunch of questions that you're asked about a behavior, and you answer those questions, and then the CIFA identifies the function for you. And let's say it says, oh, it's an attention function. Then you take that and it goes into the BIP Builder. So you say, oh, what do I do when the child hits and the function is attention? Then BIP Builder gives you a whole ton of solutions and says, these are the things you can do when it's an attention function. These are the things you can do when it's hitting, but it's a tangible function. So, but you have to use the CIFA to get the function first.
Okay. Also, how can I encourage functional play?
That's a really good question, and that's a hard question to answer briefly. So there's a few different things about play. One is that you need to have skills. You can't just throw a child in with other kids and expect them to play. You have to have skills. And the skills are varied. There's a huge number of skills involved in play. It starts with being able to look at other kids, like realistically. Some of our kids are so involved in their own universe that they don't even give eye contact to someone else. So it starts with that. It starts with just being able to attend to other kids. So that would be one skill. And as I always say, and Shannon always says here, the thing about ABA that makes it work is that you break things apart into very small segments, and you work on each one, and you don't try to do it all at once. You teach the skills first and then you bring it together. And a lot of times it just becomes very difficult because our kids are older and they're in the environment already, and our time with them. If it was an experimental setting where we had the child all day long, we could teach them pretty much anything, but we don't. So let's say you play itself. So it starts with just attending to other kids, which is a program in and of itself, which involves the child like stopping what they're doing, looking at an individual, tracking the individual, and if their level of functioning allows it, even actually being able to say what they saw. So attendance is one thing. The second thing is an observation and attending. So that's first. Second thing is all the content of play. So if it's a 2-year-old, we're talking about basic games, like very nursery rhyme type stuff. If it's a 5-year-old, we're talking about constructive play, building things perhaps, or arts and crafts. If it's an 8-year-old, we're talking about card games. I mean, every age has a different type of play, and so it becomes very, very important to identify the age and the type of play that we're talking about. All of that, by the way, is on Skills in the play curriculum. It's all developmentally normed, so you'll never get, for a 2-year-old, you'll never get a game that's appropriate for a 3-year-old or a 5-year-old. It has to be age appropriate. And then, of course, it has a lot to do with culture and location and gender. So, let's say you're a girl, you're going to be more playing with dolls. If you're a boy, you're going to be more playing with cars. I mean, and that's a given. And then the second thing is just kind of location and culture. So Some schools, a lot of the play that occurs has musical activities just because they've set up the school and the environment that way. Some schools or some activities, like if you have a play group at someone's home, it really depends on what is set up. Like the parents may have set up, oh, this is going to be a swimming party, or this is going to be we're going to have hide and seek type games, or we're going to have whatever it is, right? That's the environmental factors. But your child needs to learn all the content for that. So there's no point throwing a child into a group of other kids if the child doesn't know how to play the things they're about to play. So if your child doesn't know the rules for hide and seek, they're not going to participate. If they don't know the rules for a board game, they're not going to participate. So all those games have to be taught as well. So you have to teach the games, you have to teach all the surrounding information, right? All the stuff that goes with the games. And then you have to, in addition to that, you also have to teach the child how to identify certain key things, like what can I play with whom? So for instance, this now goes to a little bit more advanced, which is, like if I'm walking towards a group of kids and they're all playing something, then I need to join. I can't suddenly go in there and say, hey guys, let's play my thing, right? If I'm walking towards one other person, do I know this person? Have we played before? What's the history there? So there's a whole bunch of subjective stuff that goes into functional play. But to simplify it, and it hopefully the person who wrote this, I don't know what age range your child is, but you basically start by identifying the age range, the gender, and the types of activities that the peers of your child are engaged in. And you make sure that your child is the best at those particular games, because any child who's really, really good at particular games becomes popular. As long as they can somewhat cope with or do okay with all the peripheral stuff, like joining and sharing, turn taking, all of these things are involved in games. I would really recommend that you do actually access skills, because everything I said and a lot more is in the play curriculum area of skills. That should be able to help a little bit.
Okay. It looks like that was the same parent that wrote about their 2-year-old.
Okay, so it's a 2-year-old, you're in great shape, because when we're looking at 2-year play skills, it's easy. These are basic things that we're teaching at this point. A lot of it is just pretend play. You're starting maybe even at 3 or 4, but right now you're just doing really basic nursery games, and that's going to be very easy to teach.
Okay. Question, is 40 hours a week of ABA therapy too much for a 2-year-old boy?
Right, so that's a very good question too. It depends. Some of our kids who are very active, they settle into 40 hours okay, because 40 hours, it's not all sit down in one place. Right. As you know, it's like moving around and teaching play and all this kind of stuff, so it's not that bad. But for some of our kids, it becomes overwhelming. What I do is, a 2-year-old who just turned 2 yesterday, it's probably too much for them. But a 2-year-old who's in their 3rd quarter of being 2 is probably not too much for them. So what I would do is I would take the year between 2 and 3 and I would kind of shape the child into it. Usually when I have a very young child, like brand new 2-year-old, I'll start with about 15 hours. And then after, like, let's say a month or so, I'll add 5 hours and keep adding until the child works their way up to 40.
And how long would they be at the 40 hours?
So the research says that the 40 hours is, so far the research has shown that the 40 hours should be occurring all the way through for at least 2 years, if not more. Okay. From my personal experience, 40 hours is great, and honestly 50 hours is great, and 60 is great.
Really?
You could do, absolutely. I mean, when parents could afford it, we would do all day long, right? So Nancy, the funny thing is that I was telling Shannon this a few months ago. All of this is dependent on one really important study that came and then was replicated multiple times. But the very beginning study was, of course, the Lovas study.
Right.
And that was 1987. And people always say past that 40 hours. It wasn't 40 hours. It was 40 hours of time that we did, the therapists at UCLA did. what was recommended was all waking hours. The reason we said 40 hours was because we said parents go to work 40 hours a week. So when the parents are working, we're doing the therapy, and that's 40 hours. So we, as professionals or paraprofessionals, would do 40 hours, and parents would do another 20, 30 hours when they came home on the weekends, and so on and so forth. So when parents, in cases where it's all been like very, very wealthy families who are able to afford it, we don't do 40 hours, we do all waking hours. So it's from the time the child wakes up, ideally, and you know this to be true. Like if there's a really good behavior analyst with your child, or a behavioral therapist, technician who's trained with your child from the time they wake up to the time they sleep, obviously the child's going to learn a ton more. There's no end to how much they can learn. The issue is that, unfortunately, we don't have research published that shows all waking hours is really what's intended. And so a lot of the funding agencies are reducing it. We also don't have a lot of research that looks at the kids past 2.5 years. Because it's very hard to have a cohort of kids that you're tracking for 2.5 years. So now all the funding agencies come back and say, oh, well, the research shows you're supposed to do 40 hours for 2.5 years, or 2 to 3 years, but nothing past that. We all know that past that it's still effective. We just can't prove it because we haven't done the research to show. And we really should. But it's just so incredibly difficult to track kids for that period of time. Now, having said that, every child is different, and the 40 hours, so the whole concept of the 40 hours, or the whatever, every waking hours, the intensive ABA, is to do as much of it as you need for that child. So that's the ideal. And you're supposed to be looking at the trajectory of growth. So when the child gets to the point where they're learning just as fast as they're aging, or maybe they're even learning faster than they're aging, then you can start fading your hours, because now, as Lovas used to say, they've learned to learn. They're learning to learn from their environment. They'll learn even when you're not teaching them. That's the key, because if they don't learn unless you're in their face, you're always going to have to do therapy, right? But if they start to pay attention to other things, then they're going to keep learning, and you will cut out the therapy and they'll still keep improving. That's the thing about it. So, but it's always a priority. When you look at 40 hours of ABA, then you can't have school and 40 hours of ABA. It becomes very difficult. And the world has said, oh, we need to put our kids in school. But in reality, and things are changing right now, it's interesting, this current time frame of life, a lot of kids are doing in-home schooling or online schooling, which is very personal, like it's individualized. And that is very, very different. But we still have requirements, so a lot of our kids spend an incredible amount of time doing like math and English. And it's maybe never going to be functional for them. Never. They're never going to use it. So I would much rather, of course, use that time for our kids to teach them daily living skills, like using money, going out, shopping, taking care of themselves, chores, washing themselves, making food for themselves, all the things they need to survive later. Job skills, you know what I mean? We're talking about why he was 15. We should actually be working with him already on teaching him some form of pre-vocational skills, because once he is at an age where he's going to want to find a job, it's going to take longer to teach him. We want to make sure he's ready to go. And there's so much school that takes up time. So it's like it's impossible to do that. And there's no funding anymore as he ages. And so the system is still faulty. The correct system would allow us at a much younger age to start teaching the kids the stuff they need. And not necessarily, geography. Like, why does he need to know geography?
The practical application of that is like how much are they going to use that in their adult life, right?
Exactly. Or any of our kids for that matter, but especially our kids on the spectrum, yes.
Okay, so the short answer is 40 hours a week of ABA therapy too much for a 2-year-old boy? Is absolutely not.
Not, exactly.
Okay. All right, we'll take another quick break and we'll be back with more of Ask Dr. Doreen.
Hi, I'm Yvonne Johansson, and this is my little house.
My Little House is an interactive, multi-sensory educational felt toy that I invented to help develop children's language skills.
I love My Little House.
I've been working as a speech therapist for over 20 years. I have spent my entire career working with young children. I work with children with language delays, and I have many children with significant cognitive disabilities and children on the autism spectrum. It has been a constant challenge finding toys that are fun, educational, and actually engage my students. In every preschool, since I've been a young therapist, we carry on these felt boards. Kids love them because they're soft and they're fluffy, and there's usually these little pieces that attach to these boards because felt sticks onto felt. You bring them into the activity because they're putting a piece on the board. So it's almost kind of like magic. So then I just thought, wouldn't it be great if I could just take this one-dimensional board and make it into an actual three-dimensional toy? How cool would that be?
That's the idea behind My Little House. You can spread it out flat like a 4-panel felt board, or here's the cool part. In the blink of an eye, My Little House easily converts into a 3-dimensional reversible house.
This is the outside. This is the inside.
My Little House comes with 36 felt cutout pieces that match outlines in 8 colorful rooms. And they're felt, so they stick. Each piece inside My Little House has been placed with purpose.
For instance, in the kitchen, whole, half, under, on top, inside, big, bigger, and biggest, empty and full, circle, triangle, inside, outside.
Really cool thing, I have a nonprofit, Lecotech. They are the folks that put out the Differently Able Guide for Toys R Us. They've been doing it for 25 years. They gave me their seal of approval as a toy that they feel is a toy with purpose, and that will make a difference. But My Little House isn't just for kids on the spectrum or with significant disorders. It's also for typically developing 2 to 5-year-olds. It's a fun toy.
This is so soft. That piece goes.
Recently, I took My Little House to the American Speech and Hearing Association convention in Philadelphia, and the response from my peers was overwhelming. Hundreds of therapists, teachers, and heads of school districts wanted to order them.
It was real validation for me that this truly is a toy that needs to get out there.
Hi, I'm Shannon Penrod. I'm a proud autism mom, I'm a former educator, and I am the host of Autism Live. And as all 3 of those things, I want to recommend to you My Little House. This is one of the smartest toys I have ever seen for teaching language to kids who have emerging language. Whether they're on the autism spectrum or completely neurotypical, it's a great, fun, reinforcing toy, but it's especially great for our kids that are on the autism spectrum because it makes learning fun and it makes it tactile. They have these felt shapes and they get to match them up. And I'm telling you, even the adults love to play with this. We loved this toy so much that we wanted to be able to bring it to you at a great discount. So right now, if you will go to www.smartfelttoys, and when you get to the coupon code, put in a-live.com, you'll get $5 off. Isn't that great? So I want to encourage you, go and get My Little House for all the kiddos in your life.
And we are back with more of Ask Dr. Doreen, which is your chance to ask Dr. Doreen Granpeesheh your questions about your child's behavior. We have someone that has written in a question. I am the parent of an 8-year-old boy in Pakistan. He never uses his words when it comes to potty time, only when he wants attention. How can I convince him to use potty time words at the right place and time?
Well, so you have to pair giving attention to when he goes to the bathroom. So basically, don't give him attention otherwise. When he put him on a schedule, first of all, a lot of times people forget that the first thing we do for going to the bathroom is actually putting the child on a schedule. So that's very important. So a buzzer goes off at specific intervals, and I don't know the frequency with which your child goes to the bathroom, but you have to have a schedule. And then when the buzzer goes off and it's time for your child to go to the bathroom, you will go up to your child and prompt the child to ask for going to the potty, and then you'll give a ton of attention and reinforcers and whatever else it is. And if he likes attention, which we know he does because he asks for it outside of this will work. And then what you do is you gradually will reduce, so the buzzer will continue on an interval. The intervals will get longer, or they'll get more accurate, let's put it that way. And then when the buzzer goes off, you will gradually fade yourself from prompting the child. So when the buzzer goes off, the child's like, I gotta go to the bathroom, I'm gonna go ask daddy or mommy. And then the child will come and say, gotta go to the bathroom, and then you'll give him a bunch of attention. So I have to go to the bathroom, or just the word potty becomes the child's discriminative stimulus or instruction to you for attention. So like, I don't know how the child's asking for attention now, but later on what they'll be doing is every time they say I have to go to the bathroom, that's almost to you should be like asking for attention. So whenever they say it, you will light up, give them a lot of attention, take them to the bathroom, make going to the bathroom a positive thing. If children who ask for attention vocally are very easy to work with because they really crave your attention, and that's the easiest thing you can give for anything.
Okay.
So that's great.
All right, we have a couple of questions about some oppositional behaviors here.
Yes.
One says, good morning. My 12-year-old has GAD, generalized anxiety disorder, and ODD, oppositional defiance disorder. He refuses everything my husband and I ask him to do, especially brush teeth or shower. It goes from him being angry at us to then crying. It's a constant battle. I don't know what to do or where to begin. His defiance is draining us.
How old?
12 years old.
12. Okay, so there's a lot there, and let's talk about that for a few minutes. I hate that the diagnosis of ODD, oppositional defiant disorder, because usually no one is really oppositional or defiant unless they are frustrated and their environment is not really giving them enough reinforcers. So there's something wrong when the child is oppositional and defiant, and it has to do with they're unhappy. Happy people don't become oppositional or defiant. So there's something causing that. And generalized anxiety, of course, is really important that you identify kind of how you can help the anxiety. I'm not sure if the child is on medication or, these two other things, even on their own, generalized anxiety and ODD are both very incredible, massive diagnoses on their own. And now to have generalized anxiety and ODD and autism all at the same time, we're talking about a hot mess. Like you have so much going on here. So let's try to start by doing a few different things. And I can give you advice, and I will give you advice here today, but your child is 12, and this is a pretty complicated case. And honestly, my recommendation is, it's almost like you need a complicated surgery. So if I was to give you very basic instructions, I'm not sure how much help it would give you. I'll give them to you right now, but what is better is if you kind of go to school and learn surgery a little bit. So it would be very important for you to go on the site Institute for Behavioral Training, which is ibehavioraltraining.com, ibehavioraltraining.com. And go in there and go on the parents section and start learning. Some of this stuff is very easy to learn, but it's important that you get the concept down. So there's no way, it's hours and hours and hours of lectures. I could tell you very basically what I told you the early part of this show, which is you have to identify the function of a behavior before you try to deal with it. It teaches you how to deal with tantrums. It teaches you how to deal with these oppositional and defiant behaviors in a behavioral way, in the right way. Now, with your child, so that's really important because I'll just tell you some basic things here. First of all, you list all the things that your child refuses to do. So each of them individually. Brushing teeth is one whole project. Showering is one whole project. You do not want to you're putting all of them together, and that's not going to work. So you list all of them. So, and it might end up being 25 things.
Right.
Like, you know, he doesn't want to wake up. He doesn't want to get dressed. He doesn't want to brush his teeth. He doesn't want to shower. He doesn't want to come to the breakfast. I don't know what they are, but list them all out. And you are going to pick the easiest to start with. So the one that is probably the easiest to change. And you are, let's just say it's going to be, I don't know, whichever one it is, and you're going to have a whole bunch of these. One by that, and what you've identified is just the topography of the behavior. You've described what the behavior is, but you don't know what the function is. So now you have all that list of behaviors, right? And so all of the things that he is refusing to brush teeth, is refusing. What does he do when he refuses? I assume he tantrums, he screams, cries, I don't know what it is. And so now you write that next to it. What is the actual topography? What is he doing? Like he's kicking, he's hitting, he's tantruming, he's whatever it is. Now you have a little bit more information. So let's say I tell him to go brush teeth and he will scream and cry and tantrum. So what is he doing? He's avoiding brushing teeth. Great. So we have a little bit more information. Now the question is why? Why is he avoiding? So that's now trying to figure out the function. Some of our kids avoid brushing teeth because they don't like the feeling of something in their mouth, like a toothbrush. Some of our kids don't like the taste of their toothpaste. Some of our kids don't want to go to the bathroom alone. Some of our kids don't know all the steps in order. So I don't know what it is, but you have to figure out why he's trying to avoid brushing teeth. It also could be because he enjoys causing you to freak out. So that could be one reason as well, is that he's just saying no, because when he says no, you go into a frizzy and he enjoys that.
Would that be getting attention?
That would be getting attention. And that's negative attention, but it doesn't matter. To our kids, negative attention is sometimes the same as positive attention. So he could be just feeling, you know what, I'm just going to, or sometimes with our kids, they just want to control the situation. They're tired of giving in to everything you tell them to do. So they just say, no, I refuse to do it right now. You have to figure out the reasons, because all of these things can be fixed, all of it. So let's say he's just tired and he wants more control. Well, then that tells us that in his entire day, I need to give him more free time. I need to give him more time to do his own thing so that he perceives it as a fair day. Let's say he just wants to tick you off. So then that tells us that, oh, I better not react in front of him. I better just, like, if he doesn't do his thing, I either need to motor him over there to do it, or I need to ignore it. One or the other, but I definitely can't be giving attention, because that's what he's trying to accomplish.
Right.
If it's something as basic as he can't handle that thing in his mouth, you know, because it's brushing teeth and showering, I wonder if he's a very highly sensory kid. Like some of our kids are very highly sensitive to sensory input. So it could be that. Some of our kids don't like shower because the water is falling on their head and it bothers them. It feels weird. And you have to teach that skill before they're comfortable with it. Brushing teeth is the same thing. So you would start with, let's say, a washcloth, and then once he's used to using that, then you would start with a very, very soft toothbrush. Then you would go to a harder and harder toothbrush. Like, you really have to identify the reason for the whole thing, because it's not like the child's just doing it for no reason at all. There's always a reason. And once you identify the reason, then what you do, again, going back to what I was saying before, is you help the child. If it's an antecedent that you can change, like you can change the type of the toothbrush, you can have the child take baths before they get used to or have a handheld shower, which most of our kids love because it allows them to control it. There's a lot of stuff you can do to make the task easier. But at the same time, you want to make sure then that you don't allow the child to get out of doing something just because they threw a tantrum, but that you allow the child to get out of it if they ask nicely. So that's a very important task as well. Now, you're teaching the child to ask nicely, but then there are certain things, like hygiene things, that you have to have the child do. The only way you can make that successful is You break it down into smaller pieces, you help more, and you reward more. You break it down, you help more, and you reward more. So for brushing teeth, break it down. Go and get his toothbrush out, an easy toothbrush, because we don't know, maybe it's bothering him. Put a good tasting toothpaste on there and get it wet. Do it as much as you can, and all he has to do is brush. And the way we teach brushing teeth, for instance, is you even do the brushing, you just let him finish. It's called backward chaining. So you minimize the demand. You make the request as minimal as possible so that it's easy for the child to succeed. And you increase the reinforcer. So you give tons of reinforcer for that, so that his next time wants to get the reinforcer. It's really that simple. So all of these behaviors, refusing to do daily tasks that are important, all you have to do is break them down, make them easier, and reinforce them heavily. And then gradually over time, you make them harder and you reduce the reinforcer. But that's like over the course of a month, right? So it's a very gradual process.
Okay.
That's like sort of the long answer. But honestly, I think when you have so many issues going on, it will really benefit you if you do get that training.
And here's somewhat along the same lines. Whenever I ask my 11-year-old to get ready to get out the door, even if it's for something fun like a movie,
yes,
he is super slow and we all have to wait for him. I know he likes to push my buttons and doesn't do anything I ask him to, shower, eat dinner, brush teeth. How do I get him to do anything when he refuses constantly? I am grandma, and he lives with me now along with his 2 younger sisters. Thank you.
Yeah, and those are very much the same issues.
Yes.
The first, some of it is also time. Some of our kids just dawdle all the time, you know, and part of that is avoidance, and very smart of mom to or grandma to figure that out. Our kids are very clever, and they figured out that if I just take long, they might leave me alone. At some point, let me tell you, that has happened. Like, he's taken so long that people have, the initial demand has been ignored, or he's gotten out of the initial demand by taking so long. These types of things, you really benefit if you have some behavior therapists in the home, because they then try to teach the child to speed things up. They do what I just said, which is they reduce the task demand, they increase the reinforcer, and they gradually reverse it. It's hard because when you're trying to keep up with a schedule, when you have other things that are going on in life, when you have other kids perhaps or other people and your grandma, and there's so much going on, you cannot teach new skills in the course of life. It becomes incredibly difficult. Like, that's actually the primary reason that when funding cuts out and when our kids are in school, it becomes so hard to teach them anything, because they have to keep up with school. They have to keep up with the schedule. They have to keep up with after-school activities. They have to keep up. And so we never have pure time to work on these particular issues. If you had pure time to work on just the issue of, like, go get ready, then he would get really good at that task and he would become fluent. A lot of our kids are not fluent with tasks, or they just prefer to do something else. I'm pretty sure in this scenario, like, he's either just preferring to do something else, or he doesn't get the concept of time at all, and maybe it would be good for him to miss the movies or something. I don't know if he enjoys the movies. I'm not sure. But all of those types of things, you're better off getting a behavior analyst who can come in and really analyze the situation and figure out each scenario so that they can help kind of reverse it in the right way.
Okay.
These are complicated. You know this, Nancy.
Yes.
Like, when it hits real life and the child is older, it's hard because there's so much going on.
There's so many demands on the time. So, like you
there's
said,
so many demands. There's so many demands on your time as the parent.
Right.
And there's so many environmental factors that are influencing the child at any given time. It's like, why doesn't he like this activity? Why is he tantruming? All that.
Yes.
It's very hard.
So those, I think we've kind of done it here in terms of time. So
that's great.
We appreciate your time with us today, Dr. Doreen.
It's always a pleasure. Thank
Always
you so
wonderful
much for covering
you
for
sharing
Shannon.
your knowledge with us.